My neighbor tried to claim my mailbox was on his property and removed it. When I confronted him, he snapped. It should have been mine anyway. But when the post office got involved, he was the one in trouble because I've lived in my house for 15 years. Quiet neighborhood, friendly enough people, nothing out of the ordinary. The kind of place where you nod at your neighbors but don't necessarily know their life stories. Everything was fine, until he moved in. Frank. Frank was the kind of guy you take one look at and just know he's going to be a problem. He had this attitude like he was smarter than everyone, like he was just waiting for someone to challenge him. Always watching. Always looking for something to complain about. The kind of person who gets pissed off if you so much as park too close to their driveway. At first, I ignored him. I don't care about people like that. Let him be miserable. But then, one day, I came home from work and saw something that made my blood boil. My mailbox was gone. Not knocked over. Not damaged. Just gone. The only thing left was the jagged base of the post, cut clean through. I just stood there for a second, staring like an idiot. Was I losing my mind? Had I imagined my own mailbox? Then, from across the yard, I heard a voice. Figured I'd save you the trouble, Frank said, arms crossed, smirking like he'd done me a favor. I turned slowly, trying to process what I was hearing. What? Your mailbox, he said like I was the dumb one. It was on my land. So I took it down. For a second, I just stared at him, waiting for the punchline. Nothing. That mailbox has been in the same spot for 15 years. I said. Yeah, well, the last owner must have measured wrong. I checked the property lines. That spot? Mine. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Even if, for some insane reason, my mailbox was on his property, what kind of person just removes it without saying anything? Who does that? Where is it? I asked, my voice tight. Frank jerked his thumb toward his garage. You can have it back if you put it somewhere else. Now, I'm not a violent guy. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't have to physically stop myself from lunging at him. Instead, I took a deep breath and forced my face into something neutral. Fine, I said. I'll deal with it. And oh, I dealt with it. I went inside, pulled out my property deed, and started digging. I found the original survey from when I bought the house. I even pulled the county records just to be sure. Guess what? My mailbox was exactly where it was supposed to be. Frank was wrong. I could have marched over and rubbed the documents in his face right then and there, but I knew guys like Frank. He wouldn't care. He'd dig his heels in just to be difficult. So I did something better. The next morning, I went to the post office. The postmaster was a good guy, always friendly, so I told him what happened. He frowned. He removed your mailbox? Yep. That's a federal offense, he said, shaking his head. Tampering with mailboxes? Yeah, he can't do that. That's when I learned something very interesting. Once a mailbox is installed and used for mail, it's federal property. Even if it had been on Frank's land, which it wasn't, he still wouldn't have had the right to remove it. That's a crime. The postmaster told me not to do anything yet. He said he'd handle it. I walked out of that post office with the biggest smile on my face. But I wasn't done. A few days later, Frank got cocky. He actually went to the county zoning office and filed a formal complaint about my illegal mailbox. That was his second mistake. Because now, the county was involved. A zoning officer came out, looked at my documents, and let out this long sigh like he was already exhausted. Yeah, this is a waste of time, he said. Your mailbox is fine. But since Frank had filed a legal complaint, they had to take it seriously. So they sent out an official surveyor to double-check the property lines. That's when things got really interesting. The surveyor came back a few days later, and guess what? Frank's fence? The one he had just built after moving in? It was 3 feet over the property line. Onto my land. And it wasn't just the fence. Frank had also built a shed in his backyard, and it was partially on my property, too. That's a big problem, because any permanent structure built over a property line requires permits. Permits that Frank never got. At this point, I still hadn't said a word to him. I didn't have to. Because while I had been careful and followed every rule, Frank had just shot himself in the foot. The county hit him with multiple violations. He had 30 days to move his fence and apply for a permit for the shed, or tear it down. But that wasn't even the best part. Because while that was happening, the post office finished their investigation. And when the postal inspector showed up at Frank's door, well, let's just say I wish I could have seen the look on his face. I heard later from another neighbor that the inspector laid into him. Tampering with a mailbox? That's a federal offense. Frank was officially warned and ordered to return my mailbox immediately. And because he'd admitted to cutting it down, he had to pay for damages, too. But here's the thing about people like Frank. They never admit they're wrong. Even after all that, even after the fines and warnings, he still acted like I was the problem. And that's when I decided I wasn't done yet. After everything that had happened, I thought Frank might finally back off. He had been fined, embarrassed, and proven wrong in every possible way. Any normal person would have taken the loss and moved on. But Frank? Frank doubled down. The first sign that he wasn't letting this go came about a week later. I woke up to the sound of hammering. Not just regular, occasional hammering. This was furious, like someone was slamming a hammer against wood over and over again. I looked out the window, and there he was, sweating through his shirt, building a fence inside his fence. At first, I thought he was just moving it back to where it should be, like the county told him to. But then I noticed something. The new fence was just a few inches away from the old one. He wasn't moving it. He was fortifying it. Like he was building some kind of ridiculous wooden wall between our properties. He must have sensed me watching because he turned, smirked, and gave me a little nod like this was some kind of power move. I just shook my head and went inside. If this guy wanted to waste his time and money, that was on him. But then things got worse. 2 days later, I went outside to take my trash to the curb, and that's when I saw it. A camera. Frank had installed a security camera on the corner of his house, pointed directly at my driveway and front door. Not at his own yard. Not at the street. At me. That was the moment I knew Frank wasn't just being petty. He was trying to mess with me. I wasn't going to let that slide. I did some research and found out that while it is legal to have a security camera on your own property, it becomes a problem if it's deliberately pointed at someone else's private space, like a front door or a backyard where there's a reasonable expectation of privacy. So I called the local police department, explained the situation, and an officer came out later that day. Now let me tell you, watching Frank's face as the cop knocked on his door? That was a moment. He came outside, all smug at first, but as soon as the officer told him why he was there, his whole expression dropped. "The camera's for security," Frank said. "I have a right to protect my property." The officer nodded. "Of course. But your camera is directly facing your neighbor's property, which could be considered an invasion of privacy." Frank hated that. He argued, of course, but in the end, the officer made it clear, if I felt harassed or if he used the footage for anything other than home security, he could get in trouble. He didn't take the camera down, but he did tilt it slightly so it wasn't as obvious. It was a small win, but a win nonetheless. But Frank wasn't done. The next thing he did? He started parking his truck in front of my house. Now, this might not sound like a big deal, but let me explain. Frank had a perfectly good driveway. A big one. He also had plenty of space in front of his house. But suddenly, every night he started parking his truck right up against my curb, so close to my driveway that it made backing out a pain in the ass. I knew exactly what he was doing. He was trying to get a reaction out of me. But I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. Instead of confronting him, I started keeping track. Every day, I took pictures of his truck. Every single day. After a week, I went to the town office and pulled up our neighborhood's parking regulations. And wouldn't you know it, there was a rule against parking too close to a driveway. So I made a call. That night, Frank's truck got ticketed. The next night? He did it again. Another ticket. And the best part? I didn't even have to call again. By the third time, the local parking enforcement was already watching. Frank must have realized what was happening because after the fourth ticket, he finally stopped. But I could feel his anger every time I saw him. It was like an invisible weight pressing down on the neighborhood. Every interaction, every glance, was filled with this unspoken war between us. And then, because Frank just couldn't let it go, he did something unbelievable. One morning, I stepped outside, and my mailbox was gone again. Not just gone. Ripped out of the ground. This time, there was no clean cut at the base. This was violent. The ground was torn up. The post was splintered. The bolts that held it in place were snapped. And sitting right where my mailbox used to be? A pile of dog crap. Frank had escalated. I took a picture, walked straight back into my house, and called the police. This wasn't just some petty feud anymore. This was vandalism. And I was done playing games. The officer who came out took one look at the destruction and let out a low whistle. "This is bad," he said. "You got any idea who might have done this?" I almost laughed. "Yeah," I said. "I've got a pretty good idea." Frank had finally crossed the line. And now? I was going to end this. The officer took my statement, snapped a few pictures of the damage, and asked me the usual questions. Had I seen anything? Did I have any security cameras? Was there any chance this was random? I told him exactly what had been happening. The mailbox, the fence, the camera, the parking games. I laid it all out. By the time I finished talking, the officer's face had this look like he'd heard way too many stories about neighbor disputes turning ugly. Well, he sighed, tucking his notepad away. This is definitely criminal mischief. Maybe more. If we can prove he did it, he could be looking at real charges. That was music to my ears. But here's the problem, proof. Frank had ripped out my mailbox again, but unless someone saw him do it, or I had a video, he could deny it all day long. And of course he denied it when the officer knocked on his door. I don't know anything about that, Frank said, all fake innocence. Maybe some kids did it. Or maybe it wasn't installed properly. I could hear the smugness in his voice even from my porch. I wanted to lunge over the fence and rip that stupid smirk off his face. The officer couldn't arrest him, but he did give Frank a warning. You better not be lying, he said. Because if I find out you are, this turns into something a lot bigger than a fine. Frank just nodded, real slow, like he wasn't even worried. And that's when I knew he was daring me to catch him. Fine. Challenge accepted. I had tried playing by the rules. I had gone through the proper channels, done everything by the book. But Frank wanted a game? He was gonna get one. That night, I installed my own security camera, one that pointed right at my property and covered my mailbox, my driveway, and my yard. I made sure it was discreet, nothing obvious, but clear enough to catch everything. And then I baited him. I went out the next morning and put my mailbox back up again. Same spot. Same post. And then I waited. It took 2 days. I woke up to an alert on my phone, motion detected. I clicked the feed, and there he was. Frank. At 3:47 a.m., creeping across my lawn like some feral animal, a crowbar in one hand. He looked around, didn't see anything, and then ripped my mailbox out of the ground for the 3rd time. I had to pause the video just to let it sink in. He was actually this stupid. But here's the best part. The second I saw him on camera, I knew it wasn't just vandalism anymore. It was trespassing. And that was an arrestable offense. I called the cops immediately. No waiting. No warnings. No second chances. I sent them the footage, and they showed up at Frank's door that afternoon. I don't know exactly what was said, but I do know he was not expecting to get cuffed on his own front porch. He fought it. He ranted. It's just a damn mailbox. He put it in the wrong spot. This is harassment. But the cops weren't playing around anymore. Trespassing. Vandalism. Mail tampering. He was done. Or so I thought. Because the next twist? Frank had a criminal record. The officers ran his name and found prior charges, and not just little ones. There was a history there. Assault. Destruction of property. A pending case in another town. And this mailbox stunt? It violated his probation. Instead of just a slap on the wrist, Frank was facing real jail time. I found all this out later from another neighbor, who had the inside scoop from a buddy in law enforcement. Apparently, when Frank moved into our neighborhood, he was already on thin ice with the court. And now? He had just shattered that ice completely. But here's the thing. Even with everything stacked against him, Frank still wasn't done. The day after his arrest, his brother showed up at my house. And that's when I realized, this fight wasn't over yet. When Frank's brother showed up at my door, I knew I wasn't dealing with just one problem anymore. He was a stocky guy, a little older than Frank but with the same arrogant posture, the same look in his eyes like he was used to getting his way. I didn't even get a chance to say anything before he shoved a foot against my threshold and leaned in. You need to back the hell off, he said. I stared at him. Excuse me? You heard me, he snapped. You think you're gonna ruin my brother's life over a mailbox? He scoffed, shaking his head. He told me everything. You've been harassing him since the day he moved in. I laughed out loud. I couldn't help it. Harassing him? I said. Your brother has been terrorizing me for months. He stole my mailbox. 3 times. He trespassed. He got himself arrested. Frank's brother's jaw tightened, but his eyes flicked away for a second. Like maybe he knew the truth but didn't want to admit it. He's got a record, I added. And this was a violation of his probation. That's his problem, not mine. That got to him. He stepped in closer, lowering his voice. Look, man, he muttered. Frank's got a bad temper, okay? But he's not a bad guy. I raised an eyebrow. I've had to call the cops 3 times because of him. His nostrils flared. You don't get it. If this sticks, he could go away for a long time. That's not my problem. I said flatly. The muscles in his jaw flexed, and for a second, I thought he might try something. But then, just as quickly, he let out a breath, took a step back, and shook his head. "You're making a mistake," he muttered. Then he turned and walked back down my driveway. I watched him get in his truck and speed off. That night I barely slept. Not because I was scared, but because I knew this wasn't over. Not yet. Frank was the kind of guy who wouldn't let himself lose. He had too much pride, too much anger, and now that he was actually facing consequences, I knew he'd be desperate. And I was right. Because at 3 a.m, I woke up to the sound of screaming. I shot up in bed, heart hammering. It was coming from outside. I ran to the window and saw Frank standing in the middle of my yard, drunk off his ass. He was swaying, yelling at the top of his lungs, pointing at my house like he was cursing it. "You think you won?" he slurred. "You think you're so ing smart?" I grabbed my phone and called the cops. While I waited, I stayed at the window, watching him rant and stumble. "You ruined my life," he kept muttering. "You took everything." Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. Then, before I could even react, he picked up a rock and hurled it at my house. I heard the crash of glass before I even realized what had happened. He'd shattered my living room window. I sprinted downstairs, but before I even got the front door open, flashing red and blue lights lit up the street. 2 officers tackled Frank to the ground before he even saw them coming. He fought, screaming like a wild animal, cursing, thrashing. One of the officers pulled out a taser, and that's when he finally collapsed, panting. They hauled him up, and for the first time, he looked straight at me. And I saw it. This wasn't just anger. This wasn't just pride. This was pure, unfiltered hatred. His lip curled, and in the lowest, nastiest voice I'd ever heard, he muttered, "You should have just moved the ****ing mailbox." Then they shoved him into the back of the cruiser, and just like that, he was gone. The cops took my statement, asked if I wanted to press additional charges. I said yes. In the days that followed, words spread fast. Small town. People talked. Neighbors started coming up to me, saying things like, "I always thought there was something off about him," or, "I heard he got in trouble before he moved here." But the one that got me the most? Mrs. Lawson, the older woman who lived 2 doors down, stopped me one afternoon while I was checking the mail. She hesitated for a moment, then said, "I don't mean to pry, but I knew the people who lived in that house before Frank. Did you know they moved out because of him?" I stared at her. "What?" She nodded grimly. "He used to rent a house across town, near them. Started harassing them over the property line. It got bad. Police were called. Restraining orders were involved. One day they just packed up and left." I felt a chill run through me. Frank hadn't just been an asshole to me. He had a pattern. And I had been his next target. I don't know how long he's going away for. His violations, the vandalism, the trespassing, it all stacked up. He lost his house. His brother never came back. Eventually, someone else moved in. The first time I met the new owner, I was wary. But you know what he said? "Hey, I just wanted to introduce myself. If you ever need anything, let me know." Just like that. Normal. Civil. I shook his hand and realized something. For the first time in almost a year, I wasn't waiting for the next fight. Frank was gone. And my mailbox? Still standing.